Hi, I'm Brian. I'm one of the co-founders of Rora.
And I'm Fatu, the other co-founder of Rora, formerly known as Ralph.
Our company exists because offer negotiations are a deeply asymmetric process. And what we're trying to do is create a more equal playing field for candidates and companies to negotiate on. And this problem is deeply rooted in the way that we all think. Fair negotiations are so hard, really, that even as co-founders of a business that advises candidates on how to negotiate, we ourselves fail to negotiate fairly without the help of a third party.
On my side, right, it was so strange. I trusted Brian enough to move temporarily from Senegal to Canada. Yet it took me like 1.5 years to really negotiate with him on compensation. I knew I needed to negotiate, right? That was always obvious to me, but I was filled with a lot of doubt. And it was honestly, a lot of it was subconscious. I just felt awkward, honestly, discussing money and rewards and compensation with a friend. And I cared so much about the mission and the opportunity with Ralph and Rora today that all I could think was, if I'm only going to Brian to take my concerns, maybe I'll lose this opportunity. Right? That's like what it made me feel like. And like I felt that okay, maybe my peers will know something. So I asked a lot of my African immigrant peers who were co-founders of startups in the US or working in startups in the US what they thought, like what should I ask, how should I go about this. And I think the prevalent answer was just listen, prove yourself, and then bring new term sheets and give that to Brian and like basically prove your worth. And it was not very helpful. And the irony is that I procrastinated this conversation for a year and a half. And in that time, I was here like really rooting for our clients, asking them to advocate for themselves, to negotiate, and to overcome their fears. And all that time, I think I was like building the strength to overcome my own. So it's not easy.
On my side, given why Rora exists and what we're trying to do with the company, I honestly had no intention of lowballing or taking advantage of Fatu. Um, Despite this, through the negotiations, I had subconsciously attempted to do exactly that because, despite my knowing that there was no one better than Fatu to be my co-founder, when I brought her on board, I wanted to be conservative. I'd spent about a year and a half building a company before she started, and so I wanted to hire her as my first employee. And I myself thought, it's better for her to prove herself first. And my justification was, well, once Fatu proves herself, I can always compensate her more later. And the irony for me is that for that entire year and a half, I was preaching to our candidates, our clients, that you have to negotiate because companies will always be conservative and do what's commonly known as down leveling when they hire, which is essentially putting you at a more junior level. And I was doing this myself. I honestly broke down in tears when I realized that I was guilty of doing the exact same, perpetuating the exact same system that I was fighting to fix. And that was terrible, looking back on the negotiation, I realize now that, creating the safe space for Fatu to feel 100% comfortable was just impossible. I was on the other side of the table. And while we had this deep trust as friends before even building this company, in this conversation, our incentives were not aligned.
What eventually triggered progress on my end was seeking advice from a VC attorney specialized in startups who I got to know because of a friend. And she basically gave me the confidence to view my ask as justified. She helped me with information on what other startup founders were discussing, right? and what were like the most common terms and what was kind of abnormal. For example, the vesting schedule, things like that. And honestly, and she helped. Most importantly, she helped me understand what questions to ask. Right? How do I start this conversation? What questions do I bring up to Brian? And I think that it would have been impossible to do this on my own, honestly. And this is how I see the importance of having a third party. I really needed outside help.
If it wasn't for the lawyer's advice, it's shocking to me how easily we could have been guilty at falling prey to the same dogma that this company is trying to change.
Mm.
And I'm so glad that Fatu informed herself and then empowered herself to negotiate with me, because having the conversation earlier prevented the small seeds of resentment that inevitably would have grown and
Mm.
would have resulted in major conflict that would have seriously damaged our relationship, and as a result, the company.
Yes, and this is why we exist, right? It's one story. It may sound really simple, but it's actually a systemic thing, right? Um, you know, Companies cannot expect candidates to feel comfortable just having these conversations on their own, because we don't have the same amount of information, and we are on opposite sides of the negotiating table, right? And also, it's hard to ask candidates like myself, right, all on our own to overcome the fears, overcome the asymmetry, overcome this unequal system, really, and all the resources that companies have to hire. And so I think that if a company like ours, we almost made this mistake, right? We almost fell prey to this unequal system. Really, it's happening everywhere, right? Imagine the huge companies, like, for example, the huge tech companies in this world. And so it's a systemic issue. It's nobody's fault. But we do think that the best solution for both candidates and companies is to let candidates be empowered with third parties, right? These career agents that can really be there for them, inform them, and create that safe space to advocate for their needs and to create a sustainable relationship with companies.